This is Ahmed, and it was Ahmed's very first day at GEMS Wellington Academy. He was feeling very nervous and a bit tired too, because that morning he'd had to get up especially early. He'd had to brush his teeth and comb his hair and put on his brand new, very smart uniform. Because he was nervous, his mummy let him take his teddy bear along with him. He felt a bit better when he met his new class teacher, who spoke to him in a warm and friendly voice. "Hello there, Ahmed. I'm Mrs. Thomas and I'm your new class teacher. I'm really looking forward to getting to know you. I really want to know all the things that you're good at." Ahmed thought carefully for a while. What am I good at? He thought. I know. It came to him in a flash. "I can go pee-pee all by myself," he said very proudly. But then he saw that Miss Thomas looked shocked and all the other children started to giggle. He felt embarrassed and even more shy. "I'll tell you what," said Miss Thomas. "Why don't we have a go of writing our name on the piece of paper? Let's just see what we can do, shall we?" Ahmed looked at the blank piece of paper. He was starting to panic because he couldn't write his name. He didn't know where to start. He slowly grabbed the pencil clumsily in his hand, and then he looked back at Mrs. Thomas, who was smiling at him. He took a deep breath, closed his eyes, and then drew lots of shapes on the paper. And then he looked quickly back at Mrs. Thomas, who wasn't smiling quite as much anymore. He felt really embarrassed. "I can't write my name," he said. "Oh, don't worry about that," said Mrs. Thomas. "That's what we come to school for, isn't it? Learn how to write our name. Seems like a good place to start." Ahmed couldn't believe how good all the other children in the class were at writing their names. "I'm never going to be able to write my name like that," he thought. "They're all so far ahead of me." Ahmed sat down at the table with the pencils and all the blank pieces of paper, and he started to cry. A very friendly girl called Ruby came over. She put a hand on his arm and she said, in a warm and soothing voice,
"Don't worry, Ahmed. It doesn't matter if you can't write your name now. You'll soon learn. You just have to be empathetic."
Ahmed looked confused. "What's empathetic?"
Empathetic? It's when you are confident. You have to believe you can do something to be successful. And you have to collaborate, which means working with your friends to get things done. So why don't I sit down and we can have a go together?
Ahmed had a go at being empathetic. He sat down with Ruby and together they had a really good go at it. And he tried his very best to be confident. And you know what? He saw his writing improving. The next day, while Ahmed was sat down at the table with the pencils and the blank pieces of paper, he was joined by Scarlett.
"Still can't write your name then?"
she said. "No, not yet," said Ahmed. "Well, you have to be agile, don't you?" "Agile," said Ahmed. "What does agile mean?"
"It means that you're inquiring. It means that you ask lots of questions. And that you take risks with your learning." Ahmed still felt very shy and very embarrassed, but he decided he was going to be agile, and the first thing he had to do was take a risk. And so he took the risk of asking Scarlett lots of questions and being inquiring. And by the end, Ahmed was really pleased to see that his writing had really improved. The next day, when Ahmed sat down at the table to try and write his name, things were not going as well. Everything he did went wrong. He got frustrated, screwed up the pieces of paper and threw them onto the ground and all over the table. He was getting very cross. when Yin Chi came over to help him. "Don't worry if you're struggling," he said. "Challenge is a big part of learning. You've got to be hard-working." Hard-working, what do you mean? Hard-working means we practice. We keep trying to do the thing that we're finding very hard over and over again. And we persevere. We're resilient, which means we don't give up. So Ahmed, you've got to be hard-working. Ahmed decided he was going to be hard-working. And he practiced and practiced writing his name over and over again. And even when he wanted to give up, he didn't. He kept on going. He kept on trying. And he was really pleased when he saw his writing had really improved. Mrs. Thomas told Ahmed that he had to start thinking about the learning in the right way. Then she carefully wrote his name down as neatly as she could on a piece of paper. And she said, "Now you have to analyse my version." To analyse means to look really closely and notice all of the details. And so Ahmed looked very closely at the way that she had written his name on a piece of paper. He studied it and noticed all of the details. When he then had a go at writing his own name, he noticed that his writing had improved. The next day, when Ahmed was really struggling with the letter D at the end of his name, Mrs. Thomas came over and she said, "If you want to develop that letter D, you're going to have to practice the thinking skill of linking." "Linking," said Ahmed. "How do I do linking?" "Well, Ahmed, linking is when you connect what you're trying to learn to something you already know lots about." So Ahmed looked at the letter D and he thought, how can I connect that to something I know lots about? And then he saw the letter D looked a lot like a dinosaur. Ahmed loved dinosaurs. And so Ahmed traced the pencil round the dinosaur's bottom, up to the dinosaur's head, and back down to the dinosaur's feet again. And then when he looked, he'd created a beautiful letter D. The next day, Ahmed's letters still weren't looking quite right. Mrs. Thomas came over and said, "Right, Ahmed, today I want you to practice the thinking skill of creating." "What's creating?" said Ahmed. "Creating is when you use your imagination to come up with lots of new and original ideas." And so Ahmed had a go at creating. He used his imagination to imagine the letters in the world around him. He imagined the A as a big, tall, snow-capped mountain that went way up into the clouds, or a huge slide that he could slide down in the playground. He even imagined the A as the pointy pencil that he would use to write his name perfectly. Ahmed was good at creating, and the ideas kept coming. He imagined the H in his name as a horse called Henry, who he could ride around the fields. He imagined it as a tall hat that sat on his head with a huge feather. And, of course, when he came to write his name, he saw that his writing had really improved. Ahmed was feeling pretty good about his writing now. And as he sat down at the table to have another go, Miss Thomas came up with a big smile on her face. "Oh, Ahmed," she said, "your writing's come on so much. Right, now I want you to practice the thinking skill of meta-thinking." "And what's meta-thinking?" Ahmed asked. "Meta-thinking is when we plan our approach. We think carefully about how we're going to go about achieving our goal. And when we look back at our work and we think, what have I done really well and what could I do even better?" And so Ahmed practiced his meta-thinking. And he thought carefully about how he was going to approach his writing. He thought, right, it's really important I sit sensibly in my chair. And so he's pulled his chair up to the table and he sat up straight. I need to think carefully about the way I hold my pencil. And so he held the pencil just as Mrs. Thomas had told him. Then, when he wrote his name on the piece of paper, it looked better than it ever had done before. But Ahmed didn't stop there, because part of being meta thinking is to look at your work and notice those things that you've done really well and those things you could do even better. Well, Ahmed was really pleased with the way he'd written his name, and he used a purple pencil to circle those small bits that he thought he could improve. Then he had a go at making them even better, and he couldn't believe it. He'd almost written his name perfectly. There was just one tiny improvement to make with the letter E, which he practiced on the paper below until he had it just right. It was Friday, the end of Ahmed's first week at Ahmeds Wellington Academy, and he sat down at the table and he had a go at writing his name. He couldn't believe how much progress he had made. Mrs. Thomas came up and she was smiling from ear to ear. "Oh, Ahmed," she said, "I can't believe how well you've done. Right, now you're practicing the thinking skill of realising." "What does realising mean, miss?" said Ahmed. "Realising is when you realise that you've got it. You've done it, you've achieved your goal. When you can perform the skill without needing to think about it too much." Mrs. Thomas was so proud of Ahmed's learning, she gave him Student of the Week on his first week. Ahmed showed his parents how well he'd written his name when they came to collect him at the door. "Well done, Ahmed," they said. "We're so proud." And to celebrate, they all went to Baskin-Robbins by the Choitram's roundabout. And that's the story of how Ahmed became a high-performance learner at Ahmeds Wellington Academy, just like you.